Tonight's meeting is always one of my favourite meetings of the year. It's the Recorders' Evening. For those of you who are perhaps new members and don't know what a Recorders' Evening might entail, one of the main functions of Wharfedale Naturalist Society is, of course, to record our local wildlife. And we're very fortunate to have a very dedicated group of people who do just that, collecting records themselves, of course, and also from other members of the society and also other sources, and putting them together into a report. On the Recorders' Evening, we have a selection of those recorders' reports to present to the membership, and that's what we're lucky to be looking forward to tonight. We're going to have 3 reports. Shortly, we're going to have the Butterfly Report, which is going to be given by Nyree Fearnley. Then about 8 o'clock, we're going to have the Ladybird Report, which is coming from Anne Riley. And then about 8:15, we're going to hear from Gordon about bryophytes. We're going to save the Q&A session for the end. We thought that might help, the timings and so on go a bit more smoothly if we do it that way. And can I ask that we operate the usual system of popping your questions in the Q&A as we go through the evening, just so that Jeff can put them into a sensible order when the meeting reaches that stage. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm going to shut up and hand over the floor to Nyree, who's going to tell us something about what's been happening to our local butterflies over the past year. Nyree.
Okay. Oh. Okay, hopefully that's all looking okay now for you all. Hello everybody. I'm just going to run a few things. I'm going to talk a little bit about fortunes of some of our species and also a few ID tips, and towards the end just going to show you a few places in our area that are quite nice places to go looking for butterflies, where you're quite likely to see a lot of different things. So for a start, we've got here a pair of mating orange tips. All the whites this year had a much worse year than they did in 2020. But then 2020 was a particularly exceptional year for all the whites. So some of them are not actually that bad on the 10-year average. So the orange tip was about nearly 50% down on the year before, but it's not that bad on the 10-year average. I was just going to run through a few of the whites because it's the one thing that everybody always says, oh, I see this white and I can't identify it, and don't worry because none of us can. So I just thought I'd put a few slides in to start with some of the whites. So this, you can see on the orange tip that we've got this lovely dark sort of mottling orange, sort of olive green coloration. And that's on both the male and the female. So if you can see the underside, it's actually quite easy. But again, I find with the whites, they never stop, but they're always just flitting along and you're trying to chase them. And even with binoculars, it's difficult. So we'll move on now to the green veined white. Now this had a really bad year and it's also down on the 10-year average, but you never know, hopefully it might pick up again. Basically, I think a lot of butterflies had a really bad year. The ones that emerged quite early in spring, the ones that emerged sort of in April, plus the weather in April last year wasn't particularly good. We had that really cold spell. And although we had a reasonable amount of sun in April, it was pretty cold, pretty windy. So a lot of the earlier butterflies didn't do as well, but some of the later ones did better, as we'll see later on. So you can see on this green veined white that it's got this very distinct veining. And again, if you see the underside, there's nothing else like it. None of the other whites are like it. So it is fairly easy and it's very, very widespread and common. It does quite like marshy areas. It likes areas with rushes and bits of bog and that sort of thing. So now we move on to the other two whites, the small white and the large white, and I've put these two on together so that you can see that the underside of these is very, very similar. They've got this much more plain sort of yellow dusting, not the strong veins of the green veined white. The large white does have a much bigger sort of the black areas are much more pronounced on the large white. If you see it and it's really big and bold and black, and quite often when they're flying you can even see the black, and it's hard to see because this is the underside, but this section here, if it's the upper wing, all this section is black on the large white, whereas on the small white you've got a much smaller area of black here, and the little black dot there is also much more, a lot fainter, less pronounced. So these two are very difficult to tell apart unless they really stop, and none of us, I don't know anybody that can identify every white they see, and sometimes we chase them with binoculars and we're up and down and you think they're stopping and then they're off again, or then next thing they're away over a hedge and they're gone. So that's a little bit about the white. So now a really fantastic news story, because this is a purple hair streak, and we had a couple in our area, Rick Elson, Hazel Watson, and these are actually their photos. The next 3 slides are their photos, and they went out specifically looking, as did some of the others, ourselves included. We went looking as well, and it's always in the top of oak trees, and it tends to fly late afternoon, so you're looking at 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening is your peak time for seeing this butterfly. But you really do need binoculars. I mean, you probably see from these next few slides that they're taken from quite a distance away, and I particularly like this shot because you've got the lovely shot of the underwing, which is actually quite pretty, but you also just get a hint of that purple on its upper wing. So I'll move on now to one that shows a little bit more of the upper surface, and you can see that it's actually can look quite brown. You just got a little hint of the purple there, and it just depends how the light shines on it. And to be fair, I have actually never seen the upper surface of a purple hair streak. They're just always miles away on top of a tree. The only time I've ever seen one actually landed on the ground, it had its wings shut. But this butterfly was up 1,080% on the year before, and on the 10-year average it was up 755%. And it is mainly due to people going look at this, people looking for it, but also I think it has had quite a good year nationally as well. And I've put these ones in because when you're looking, you quite often scanning the top of the trees with your binoculars, you find an oak tree, and they tend to, like, I'm told, south facing trees, and you can see them on dull days if you look with binoculars, like you can see on the left hand shot there that it's sort of silhouetted above the sky. And we actually found one last year in an oak tree up at Dock Park, and it was right at the top of a huge oak tree, and it was blowing a gale and pretty miserable afternoon, and we didn't really expect to see one at all. And this little butterfly was clinging on for dear life, and the branches were swinging backwards and forwards, and you could just see this. Once we'd found it with binoculars, you could actually just see it with the naked eye, but it's clinging on. But I suppose the top of the trees is also a good vantage point, so they probably tend to be quite near the top, and you can probably tell that the quality is not as good on the shot on the right, because it's probably taken on a pretty high zoom or cropped later on. But you can actually, we found them just scanning trees with binoculars and just see them sit on a leaf, and I only actually realised yesterday, but there's actually 2 of them on that shot there. So moving on now, this is actually the egg of a purple hair streak, and this is a shot of Paul Millard. And when we had all those gales not too long ago, and lots of trees came down, and Paul was out and about, and there was some huge oak trees that come down, so he thought, well, when am I ever going to get a chance to look in the top of an oak tree? So he went across and started looking, you know, in what would have been the top of the tree, but it's now on the floor, and he found a few purple hair streak eggs. So this is his shot, They're actually not too difficult to find, butterfly eggs, if you sort of get your eye in. They can show out quite distinct on leaves, and I've got some more eggs for you a little bit later on as well. So we're going to move on now to the next hair streak, which is the white letter hair streak. And I've put this in because this is another of the hair streaks that lives high in trees, but this time elm trees, including wych elm. And it's a butterfly we get very, very few records of. We only had 7 records in 2021. So it'd be great if people like are out and about and they're near elm trees and you know, just have a look. Again, you're probably going to need binoculars, but I have found this butterfly does tend to come down a bit more readily than purple hair streak. The times that I've seen it, it does seem to like creeping thistle. It's present at Benridin gravel pits and also at Gallows Hill Nature Reserve, I think, although we didn't actually have a report for it last year from Gallows Hill, but we have had in previous years. We did have in the year before. But it's worth looking out anywhere where there's elm trees. We've had, you know, new sites come in, you know, that people have found. So it'd be great if anybody's keen and fancies keeping an eye out for it. And then the last of the hair streaks in our area, this is the green hair streak. And this one is, without any doubt, the easiest to see, but then it's still not all that easy to see. It's amazing. It is a brighter green than the leaves around. And once you get your eye in, you can see it. I mean, we took a friend of ours on to Shevin last year. And once we started spotting a few, then we were all spotting them. And they're a really pretty little thing. But I think the thing that puts people off spotting them most is that they're actually quite small. They're much smaller than the others. They're, if you know, sort of small copper, small heath, that sort of size. They're quite small. And the other thing is when they fly, the upper surface of the wing is brown. When they land, they always have the wings shut. I put these 2 shots in just to show the different markings, because you can see the one on the left there has got quite a lot of white markings and the other one's just got a single spot, and it is quite a fresh specimen. So they do say that you can actually identify individual insects by the markings on them, a bit like fingerprints. So if you are out and about, I sometimes just kind of look in and I'll say, oh, I know I've not seen that one before because its markings are different. So you can tell from the markings. So I was talking about the upper surface of the wing. So I'm hoping this is going to work. I've just got a short video here for you. It'll set off, it's in slow motion, so you get a bit of a chance, and it'll set off flying and then it does stop and it sets off again. So just keep a close eye on it and we'll see how it goes. Hey, it's working, that's good. It's not a very long video, so then it sets off. You can hopefully see that brown coloration. So when they're actually in flight and you're looking at them, I mean, the first time I ever saw them, I just thought it was a bit of leaf blowing in the wind. I didn't even realize it was a butterfly. So I'll move on because it's going to start playing again. So this is another of Paul Millard's photos, and this was taken last year. And this is the egg of the green hair streak. And he found this on rock rose up Troller's Gill near his house. And we've never found an egg before, and it's also mainly in our area. It feeds on bilberry, so it's quite unusual to find it on rock rose. And the reason we know it was green hair streak is partly the time of year. It's sort of quite early in the year, and it's a slightly paler green colour, because we do have another butterfly in our area, which is the northern brown argus, and that is definitely lays its eggs on rock rose, but that's much later in the year. And I've got a picture of the egg of a northern brown argus, and it's slightly overexposed, this picture, but it's actually very white. Is the egg of the northern brown argus, and again they always lay them on the upper surface of the leaf, and they're actually quite easy to spot if you start looking at rock rose leaves. We've found quite a few over the years, and I once got a botany group looking for them, and they were finding, they've found quite a few. So this is the Scotch argus, and we've had this in our area now for quite a number of years, and we know that it was an unofficial reintroduction, that somebody had you know, picked up a few from somewhere. They've since been DNA tested, and we know that they originate from Smaredale in Cumbria. Smaredale Gill, which some of you might know, not far from Kirby Stephen. But we've sort of suspected for a while that we actually had 4 different sites, and we actually found the 5th site was proven this year when Paul went and found about 15 flying, and then a little bit later on we went with Paul and a couple from Cumbria who were like interested in what our sites looked like, and we saw it again there. So that was brilliant. It was actually confirmed at all 5 sites this year. We ourselves and Paul, we checked Parkrash at Kettlewell and we never saw one, but Kelvin Smith said he saw one there, so that's brilliant. So we've got it recorded from all 5 sites. Its main site, as probably a lot of you know, is Bastow Wood, just above Grasswood at Grassington, and we actually did the butterfly walk there last year, which a few of you came on. So if you want to see it, that's a public site. Some of the sites are, a couple of the sites it's on a private anyway, but Bastow Wood is the biggest colony, and if you go up there at the right time of year on a sunny day, you're almost certain to see it. So moved on to small copper, very pretty little thing. I think they're gorgeous. They're such a brilliant orange colour, they really stand out. And that had a really good year this year. It was up by about 49% on the year before. So that's a really nice thing. And it has quite a long flight period because it has a couple of broods, and it's even been thought that it can potentially in really good years even have 3 broods. So we've seen it well into November a couple of years ago. You tend to see it in grasslands. Its caterpillars feed on sorrels. So you can sort of see it anywhere, but it's difficult to say a spot to go specifically to see this butterfly. It's just something that you see, and it's a joy when you see one. And now this is a small tortoise shell, and we've put this in. It didn't have the best of years last year. It was down by around 39% on 2020, and it was slightly down on the 10-year average as well. But in general, the last sort of 3 or 4 years have been much better for it. In 2017, it had an absolutely terrible year. It was really down, and there was a lot of concern about it and what was happening with it. But it's actually doing a lot better. And Paul has told me that in VC65, where he's the county recorder, he said it's now their commonest butterfly for last year, so that's really good. We saw it in really good numbers at Sun Lane Nature Reserve last summer. We walk a transect there now, shared with Janet, who I believe is probably watching, and we went one day when the scabious was in flower, and we had over 50 of them in the main grassy area in the middle, so that was lovely to see. You were just walking along and saying, oh, you know, the 34, 35 up to like. So moving on now, Holly Blue, that also had a really good year last year. It was up 76% on 2020. And it's quite interesting because I checked some figures for the big butterfly count that's run by Butterfly Conservation. And it was actually significantly down on the year before on their national figures. Now, the only thing to say with that is that they just run the big butterfly count for a couple of weeks each year, so they would only pick up on one of the broods. But it was well down there, and ours was like well up, so that's a really nice thing, and it's a pretty little butterfly. So we're going to just move on now to a little bit of ID between the 2 blues that we have in our area. Now the Holly Blue there is actually a female. The male doesn't have all the black around the edges. It is just plain blue like you can see on the common blue male, but the Holly Blue is a much sort of duskier blue. It's not such a brilliant blue as the common blue, so it is possible to tell them apart from the upper surface, and also the habitats are totally different. So the Holly Blue you'll see anywhere where there's holly or ivy, and the common blue that needs bird's foot trefoil. So I'm going to move on to the undersurface now, because they are quite obviously different. The Holly Blue is this lovely silvery blue, and with just tiny little black markings, and then you've got the common blue that's got much more sort of pronounced markings with the orange and the spots with the white round the black, and totally different. the holly blue flies a lot earlier. It's flying in April, and it'll fly right through because it has 2 broods. You can see it, you know, right through into late in the year. I put these in because I had about 3 different people last year that all sent me in records of common blue from the gardens. And when I actually sort of got back to them and queried it and asked if there'd any bird's foot trefoil or this or that and talked to them, it was almost certain that it was holly blue they'd seen. Holly blue is actually quite common in gardens. So we get quite a lot of the records for holly blue are from people's gardens, whereas the common blue is pretty rare in a garden unless you live somewhere close to bird's foot trefoil or you have it in your garden. You probably wouldn't see it in the middle of a town like Otley or Ilkley or Addingham, but you know, so the common blue is much more common further up the dale. Once you get up into the dales, it's common right up Wharfedale, upper Wharfedale, up round Yockhamthwaite and all around there. So whereas the holly blue is a lot more sort of suburban really. So moving on a quick now to a few more little special things, the things a bit rarer. So this is a Dingy Skipper, and this photo was taken by Kelvin Smith at Timberlings last year, and we've never had a record from there before. But we've had records in our area in different places. The few years we've had it at Ruscross Reservoir near where the Yale Boating Club car park was in there, but this year it was never found there. Now we looked there and Paul looked there and we didn't find it, and it popped up at Timberlings. So it tends to like quite bare ground again. Bird's foot trefoil is what it likes, but it's sort of often on like car parks and things are really good for it. It doesn't like too much undergrowth, otherwise it swamps out its food plant. So I'm now moving on to 3 species that are not very often seen in our area, fairly unlikely, but there's a chance with things moving about due to climate change and other things. So this is a marbled white. I put the 2 shots in so you get the upper wing and the underwing. We've got a mating pair there, obviously, so you can see that the female's a bit more browner and the male's the slightly smaller, blacker one. Females with butterflies tend to be larger because they're carrying the eggs. So with butterflies, it's usually the females who are a bit larger. So we had a couple of possible sightings of marbled white last year, but neither could be confirmed. It has been seen occasionally in our area, but not very often, and the ones that have been seen could be people releasing them, but it's always something to keep an eye out for. And this is silver washed fritillary, and we did have a record in 2019, 2020, but not in 2021. And it's the largest fritillary that we have. It's quite a big butterfly, fairly obvious. It is different from the dark green fritillary that we have up the dales. Quite a big bold butterfly, so another one to look out for, because this is a butterfly that definitely is moving just naturally, dispersing. It can be quite a strong flyer. There's places in Yorkshire that have got quite good colonies of it now. At Bishop Wood near Selby's got a really good colonies of it, so another one to look out for. And this is the Essex Skipper, and it's very, very similar to the small skipper, and then we've got this shot in. It's taken by Ian Waller, and we put it in because the main ID feature is the tips of the antennae are absolutely jet black all the way around, whereas on the small skipper they're quite orangey. The large skipper does have sort of some black on the end of its antennae, but not all the way around. And the large skipper is also much more heavily marked, whereas your small skipper and your Essex skipper, if you see the orangey colour on them, they're fairly plain. The large skipper is a bit more like a checkerboard pattern. So small skipper and Essex skipper, the main thing is to look out for is these super black tips. Someone once said they look like they're dipped in ink, and they are. So I'm just going to move on now to, we're nearly at the end now, just quickly a few places where if you want to see butterflies that are good places. So these next 4 pictures are taken by Anne Riley, and this is Sun Lane Nature Reserve at Burley. So it's not a very big reserve, but it's actually stunningly pretty, as you'll see from these next few reserves. And as I said, we were sharing a transect here last year for the first time. And so we saw it at different times of year, and it was actually really, really lovely. So we've got this lovely gravel path, beautiful flowers. You get evening primrose as well and things like that. And later in the year, you get, there's some fabulous buddleias there, huge big buddleias with all these flowers on, and I can't actually see a butterfly on there, but you've missed out there, Anne. But anyway, we get brimstones, peacocks, red admirals, tortoiseshells, all love this at the right time of year. There's also a huge buddleia just right by the entrance where you go in. There's a nice little bench there you can sit on as well, and you can just sit and watch the butterflies on a nice day. We saw holly blue there by that entrance as well last year. I just put that in. It's the same gravel path again, but just a slightly different shot with a few different plants. Ragwort, small coppers love ragwort. If you see ragwort flowering later in the year, that's definitely worth checking for small copper. And they're quite, the bright orange shows up really well, so you can see them from, even though they're quite small, you can actually see them from a fair distance away. And I took this because I was saying about the tortoise shells last year and the scabious, so you can sort of see the what the scabious is like, and it covers the whole of the grassland area at Sunlane. It was just covered last year when the scabious was in flower, and the tortoise shells just loved it. And we were just walking along and they were flitting everywhere. I mean, our count of around 50 was probably quite significantly under what there actually was there, because we didn't even cover every bit of the grass. We were just walking up and down a couple of times. So this, again, it's a bit more of a botanical shot with the mountain pansy, but this is Bastow Wood, where I said about for the Scotch Argus. So if you go out of Grassington and park on the road for Grasswood, you've got to walk up a fairly steepish hill there, but it's definitely worth it. It's apart from Scotch Argus, it's great for, there's Northern Brown Argus, Common Blue, Small Heath, Skippers. You get, you know, your more common things like red admirals. I think on the butterfly walk we had some cracking red admirals nectaring that everybody got really good views of. It's a lovely little area to potter around in, and it gets stunning with lots of other flowers. Betony is beautiful, carpets of it, which brings us on to my next shot, which is all the purple flowers there are Betony. And this was taken on the path between Hubberholme and Yokenthwaite in Upper Wharfedale. And it's a lovely little path to walk on, following the river up, not too strenuous. And we saw all sorts of grassland species. You've got your meadow brown and ringlet, which they both had good years last year because they were a later species. Like I said, the small and large skipper, they had good years, and you see them about here as well. We see small copper. We saw small copper here. It's a good area for common blue. And if you get all the way from Hubberholme to Yokenthwaite and you're feeling fit and you've got plenty of time, there's a lovely little path cuts up from Yokenthwaite up the hill and in through Strandswood, and you can take a higher level path that takes you across towards Cray and then back down to Hubberholme. And there's a little area above Strandswood that is another fabulous place for butterflies, and an absolute joy when all the flowers are out. So just to finish with, I've just a quick word about records. Obviously, we can't do anything without the records. Records are brilliant because, you know, as we're always saying, we can use them for so many things. So all we need is your name, where you've seen them, ideally with a grid reference or a postcode. There's a couple of really good places. I use this grid reference finder website, and it's like a Google Earth map, and you can just zoom in and out and click on the spot where you saw your butterfly, and it gives you a grid reference. And there's an app for your phone called OS Locate, which again is brilliant. You just tap on it and it gives you a 6-figure grid reference, and it also gives you like a compass point and altitude on that one as well, which is quite useful. I sometimes even just revert to taking a grid reference off a paper map. The date you saw it, obviously what species it was and how many, and if possible, if you don't know exactly how many, you know, sometimes we get people sending things like lots or numerous or several, and it's sort of open to interpretation. So if you can just make a rough guess, you know, like 10 or 50 or 100. But sending in records, you don't worry about sending in everything you see, just send in whatever you're comfortable with. If you send us one record a year, it's one record more, and you know, it should be fun and not something that you feel like a bit of a chore. So some people just send us in records if they see something they think's a bit special, or something in huge numbers, or maybe something they've not seen before, and then, you know, we've got there's only a few people that just send in sort of pretty much everything. There's not that many really that send in probably everything, so any records at all are really useful. We've just had this year, we were contacted by some people from the Otley Wildlife Friendly group, and they're trying to work with Leeds City Council to get them to reduce mowing on grass verges and things, to try and encourage more plants and biodiversity. And you know, they got in touch with myself and some of the other recorders if we've got any records that might, you know, they might be able to use to add a bit of clout to reasons like to try and improve habitats for wildlife. So, and you know, it can be used for stopping planning applications and things, and all sorts. There's a whole host of different things we can look at climate change, how things are moving and all sorts. So all records are useful, but just whatever you're happy to send in is brilliant. And this is the last slide just to finish with. I put this brimstone in. Brimstone is a lovely butterfly. They are flying now. They have been seen. Paul just told me today that one was seen at Grasswood on the 27th of January. But if we get this nice sunny weather, I know it's been a bit cold, and we actually went out looking for butterflies like a week ago, and we went to Sun Lane, and we went to Otley Wetlands, and we went to some places at Fearnley that we know, and we never saw a butterfly. But you never know. These next few days might not, tomorrow's not looking too bad. I think I'm hoping to maybe go and have a quick look somewhere. So thank you very much. And if you've any questions, I think they're going to be at the end. So I'll stop my screen sharing now. We can move on to the next person.
Thank you so much for that, Nyree. What fantastic tips in there, both about how to identify different butterflies, but also where to go in the local area to see them. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so next we are going to have Anne Riley, who's going to talk to us about ladybirds.
Thank you, Helen. Okay. Right, so here we are, the Ladybird Report for 2021. And just to summarise, I received 223 records of native species comprising 568 individuals, 83 records of harlequin comprising 1,244 individuals. So that is up on many of the previous years. However, in addition to all the usual people who submit records like Paul Purvis and Nyree and David and Audrey Gramshaw and Mike and Joyce Clark, can't remember everybody, these two very enthusiastic new members, Hazel Watson and Rick Else, who were at that point living in Menston, sent in loads of records between April and July. So, I mean, these records are very welcome, but it makes interpreting trends extremely difficult. But more excitingly, perhaps in 2021, we got 4 new species for the Wharfedale list. Cream streaked and striped, which are both conifer specialists, and they were both me, and heather and hieroglyphic ladybirds from Aidan Smith, who you may recognise the name. Aidan is now one of our Nature Notes writers, and he often writes about insects, which is really good. So 4 new species. And we'll start with the 7-spot because this is the archetypal ladybird, if you like, the one that everybody recognises. And I had a very early mating pair, no time wasted getting down to business, on the 30th of March. And I spent quite a few very, well, entertained for me afternoons watching 7-spot ladybirds devouring aphids. Now, 7-spot ladybirds are certainly the gardener's friend because they consume an enormous number of aphids in a healthy garden where there aren't any pesticides used. 50 and upwards in a day, one ladybird, and the larvae equally voracious, so they are very much to be encouraged. And another little reminder not to be too tidy in the garden, because when it gets to autumn, ladybirds are looking for somewhere nice and cozy to hibernate. And this one looks like it's made a little bed, you know, in the middle of a knapweed head and getting ready to snuggle down. The other interesting record that said there were no big numbers of 7-spot ladybirds was one that I found in Waitrose on a head of broccoli. Now, broccoli wasn't actually on my shopping list, but of course I had to buy this particular head of broccoli so that I could rescue the ladybird. So I brought it home and secreted amongst the ivy somewhere. 2-spot ladybird is another native ladybird that is well recognised. Its numbers have been declining over the last few years, but this year, 2021, was really very good for the 2-spot, largely because of Hazel and Rick, who outside their window, their flat in Menston, have a hawthorn tree, and from the second floor they get really good views quite high up in the tree, and they were sending me records of about 20 at a time. Yeah, I was thinking, blimey, I'm going to have to pull my socks up here and find a few more ladybirds. And in fact, I had more records personally of 2-spot than I've had for a long time, and Paul Purvis had good numbers as well. So I think it was genuinely quite a good year for the 2-spot ladybird. Now, at first glance, this might look like one of the, because 2-spot is a very variable ladybird, a black version of a 2-spot, but in fact this is a pine ladybird. This is a kidney spot ladybird, which was new to Wharfedale in 2019 when Paul Purvis started finding big numbers at Gallows Hill early in the year on ash trunks. It feeds on scale insects, and he had a peak count in 2019 of 116 individuals. Last year, 2020, it had dropped. He got 36, and this year just gone, he only managed to find 3. Now, whether that's a true reflection of a real big boom in 2019 or just the days that he was able to go down or what, I don't know. But I did start seeing a few on my walk, one particular bit of my walk where there are a few pine trees. So I added that to my personal list for Burley. And this I was delighted to work out eventually. This is actually a larva of a kidney spot ladybird. It looks like a little porcupine or something. It was, of course, very small, but it caused me quite a bit of excitement when I found that. 10-spot ladybird is very variable, closely related to the 2-spot. This is the classic form of a 10-spot ladybird. It's quite small. Again, it's 4 millimeters, so small ladybird. But this was an unusual form, which I thought was just worth showing. And this is a 10-spot ladybird, but it's a form called Guttato punctata. The 14-spot ladybird, we never have very many records of these, but just a few records. I get them in the garden in 1s and 2s, and Hazel and Rick also had records from around Burley. And this one's claim to fame is that the fact that it's supposed to look like a clown's face. Something's supposed to look like a clown's face, so that's a way that you remember the 14-spot ladybird. And one here, well, I was going to say getting his leg over, but you know what I mean. This was again on my walk. The colour is a bit variable, the ground colour, that was a pale one. And this is another ladybird that is really very good at devouring aphids, and it looks like this one is queuing up to be eaten. Yeah, me next. This is the larva of a 22-spot. Now, in 2020, I was getting big number of these on my regular walk, so I could count. I think my maximum was 50 on one short stretch of path, but I was typically getting 20 or 30. And this year, 2021, my maximum was 1. So I don't know what the explanation is, but this does not feed on aphids. This feeds on mildew. And this is a mildewed hogweed leaf, and that's what it looks like as an adult, a very intense yellow, pretty little ladybird, very small again, 4 millimeters. There were 1 or 2 other records from people. I think that Hazel and Rick found a mating pair at Nellbank, and Mike and Joyce Clark found a couple in their garden, but it was not widely reported. The orange ladybird is one that often comes into a moth trap, and we had the odd one, but Hazel and Rick made a point of looking under leaves. You know, they really were looking for things, and under laurel leaves and sycamore leaves particularly, they were finding really quite good numbers. And Nyree had quite a good number from Lindley Wood, and I was finding them later in the year along a fence along Stead Wood. So another mildew feeder, and the colour pattern never varies, so if you see one like this, it's definitely an orange ladybird. That's easy, and that is an orange ladybird larva. Our biggest native ladybird is the eyed ladybird, and it's called eyed because it's got these pale rings around the black spots. It can get up to nearly 9 millimeters in size, so that's pretty huge for a ladybird. The eyes are not always quite so obvious. But the pattern on the pronotum is very distinctive. It's a very sort of clean, blocky pattern. Very handsome ladybird, particularly on the lichen-covered fence. And one day I had an interesting experience with an eyed ladybird up the road, because on this fence is a bit of barbed wire, so you can see the scale. And trapped between the barbed wire and the wooden fence was some spider's web, and in the spider's web were a few fragments of fly, and this opportunistic eyed ladybird thought, well, a quick snack here I don't have to work for, so I just had better be careful. And so it trod I really thought I was going to have to rescue it, trod very carefully onto the spider's web, grabbed the remains of the fly, it didn't look very appetizing, and proceeded to eat it. And then it managed very successfully, carefully, to step off back onto the fence. So that was quite an entertaining 20 minutes, half an hour I spent with that. And this, I'm pretty sure, is the pupa of an eyed ladybird, but pupae of ladybirds are really, really quite difficult to work out which is what. You've got to look for the projections, and now these spot patterns are. Well, pretty sure that is an eyed ladybird. Cream spot ladybird we don't get many of, but it's not variable, so it's quite easy to recognise. And this, which looks at first glance like a cream spot ladybird, this is actually an 18 spot ladybird. Now, I misidentified this species in 2018. We got one of these in the moth trap, and I've just wrote it down as a cream spot. And it wasn't until months later when I reviewed the pictures and I thought, hang about, that bit doesn't look right there. And it was an 18 spot. And I haven't seen it since between 2018 and 2021, and then I started finding quite a few once you get your eye in. Now, also on this little stretch of path, which is only about 50 yards long, this is quite interesting, because there's a chap called Russ who is not a member of the Nats, but who is interested and spends a lot of time walking around Burley. And he's always telling me what he's seen. And one day he said, well, I found a striped ladybird, and I've got a picture to prove it. And he had, and I thought, blimey, this is no good at all. So I redoubled my efforts along the path to see what interesting things there were. And eventually I found this. So this is new for Wharfedale, recorded by a member of Wharfedale Nats now. And this is just another picture of the same thing. And another new species, which is a conifer specialist, is the cream streaked, which is related to the harlequin ladybird. So you can see it's a Harmonia. Axyridis is harlequin. This is a Harmonia quadripunctata, and it is a fairly recent, well, 1930s, so not that recent, colonist to the UK, and it's quite variable, not as variable as a harlequin. This is another form of it, the cream streaked ladybird, and again, it always has diagnostic features are it's just got one spot on each wing case at the shoulder, and then line of 3 and 3, and then another 1. The Harlequin ladybird always has 2 spots, the succedanear form on the wing case. So, and Aidan Smith and his 2 new ladybirds, the heather ladybird earlier in the year, I haven't got a photo, but I'm absolutely sure he'll be right. But the hieroglyphic ladybird, which you saw and photographed in August, this is it. So that's really good. 2 new ladybirds from Aidan. Now, lastly, briefly, the Harlequin ladybird. We're still getting big numbers of Harlequin. The larvae are easily recognisable with these rows of orange dots, and they're about for such a long period in the year. This was November. This is one of the 3 colour forms that we get. This is the most common, the succedanear, and about 80% of individuals are this colour form. This one hasn't coloured up properly yet, but it's always got a red wing, a red background and black spots. So that's the form known as succedanear. And the legs are always brown, but you can't always see that very easily. And I just like that as a photograph because you can see all the details on its little feet. And this is a better coloured up succedanear. So here you can see, this is the one that's closely related to the cream streaked ladybird. There are 2 spots on its shoulder. And of the other 2 forms, this is the form conspicua with 2 red patches on the black wing cases. Sometimes the dots like that, sometimes it's made its way into the red patch like that. And then the 3rd form, spectabilis, has 4 red patches, which may be with a bit of a jimp out like that, or they may be quite round. Now, through October and November, I started noticing that the succedanear form, the common one, was getting blacker. There were ladybirds with a lot more black, so that the black spots were fusing and making really big patches, until by December, I was finding some individuals that were nearly all black. So I started thinking, well, I wonder if this has got something to do with temperature, because it's definitely later in the year. You know, is there an advantage in being blacker? Well, I suppose you'd be warmer if you were blacker when there's less sunlight. So I wrote to Helen Roy, Professor Helen Roy, who is the ladybird person in the UK, and she said, well, yes, actually, thermal melanism is a phenomenon, and this might be partly the reason why this form of the ladybird is so successful, because it can, individuals coming out later in the year can have darker coloration, which gives them an advantage because they keep warmer. So I just thought that was quite an interesting fact. So there you go. That is the end of my report for 2021. And I will stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne. What fantastic news. We've got some new ladybirds. Absolutely wonderful. Very exciting. Okay. Now we're going to move to bryophytes. I'm going to hear about those from Gordon. Over to you, Gordon.
Thank you, Helen. Now then, just share the screen first. Oops. Let's see, sorry, I start from the beginning, usually the best place to start. Oh, it's not happening. Excellent. Right, so good evening, everyone. Yes, I'm Gordon Haycock. I'm the bryophyte recorder. And this evening, I'd like to focus on what we can do with the records that we compile. So I'm going to highlight a few different bryophytes, and we can see what they're telling us about the habitats in Wharfedale. So just to start off with, there's a couple of things about mosses in particular. They tend to be very cosmopolitan, so they're dispersed using very light spores, and actually, which is an extremely effective dispersal mechanism. So that means that many moss species actually have a distribution which spans the whole of a hemisphere. So they're either northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, and there's not much interchange between the two just because of the way that global wind patterns happen. So that's the first thing to think about. So basically, there's a constant rain of spores coming down on us, most of which are not successful. Now, the other reference that I've got for this evening is this book from it's a Yorkshire Naturalist Union publication from 1888. My mum actually came across this in Bridlington in a bookshop, and she thought I might be interested. And I was extremely interested, so it was quite a lucky find, really. She had absolutely no idea what it was. So it just sort of shows the importance of local natural history societies and recording, because now I can look back. This is the floor of the whole of the West Riding of Yorkshire. The detail is fantastic, and it's really useful because now we can look back to 1888 and look at the records we have now and have a think about what changes have taken place. So our first featured bryophyte is one called Krithia Hetramala. It's an epiphyte, so it grows on trees, usually elder and ash, but often on sycamore, willow, less often on other trees, sometimes on rocks. And it has a distribution that's described as sub-Mediterranean, sub-Atlantic. So it likes it warm and wet, basically. But it's not common in Scotland. And I think its natural distribution, certainly up to at present, is anything south of the M62. But the important thing about it is it's quite easy to spot when it's on the tree. It's a relatively big bryophyte, and it's easy to identify. So you'll notice here the capsules don't have a stalk at all, and then there's lots of them running all the way up the stem. So it's very unlikely to be overlooked by your average bryologist. When I began recording in 2008, it was virtually unknown in Wharfedale. And I'd seen it in Snowdonia only as an exotic rarity. What quite usefully though, I helped to organise the British Bryological Society outing in Kettlewell in 2011, and so lots of expert bryologists came to the Dale, which revealed all sorts of things. So by 2013, I sort of got some software, and then so that I could start to map where the distributions of some of our bryophytes. So I don't know if I need to quickly run through the map, but if you'll see in the south here, in the southeast corner, so this is the Washburn Valley coming up here with the various reservoirs. Otley and Burley and Ilkley would be around here. Going on to Addingham, Bolton Abbey. This is pretty much where the Strid is, where two records do occur. And then going north, there's Grimwith Reservoir here, up past Grassington. Kettlewell's about here. This is Littondale. And then the Dale goes right up past Auchenthwaite to Nethergill and Aldershire. So you can see there were a few records here found by 2013. One of the limiting factors for it actually in the Dales is the lack of trees. And I do have one tetrad, which is a 2 kilometre by 2 kilometre square, which is represented by these green dots, which actually only has 2 trees in it. And one is an ash tree that's on its way out, unfortunately, to an ash tieback. So Krithia is also limited by the amount of trees. So yeah, moving forward in time, for 2018, we can see that there's quite a few more records, and then and this is its distribution in 2022. So you can see it's increased. Well, it could have been under recorded before, but the BBS outing sort of makes me think that, well, if it was there, people would have found it. And really, certainly in Lower Wharfedale, it really has increased dramatically. Now, thinking back to Lees and his flora from 1888, the entry for Krithia Hetramala says, on decaying bark or whetstones, very rare, only one old record from Broughton Hall near Skipton, and that was by John Noel. And I think what Lees describes as the smoky districts is, he says it's absent from the smoky districts, and essentially this is a species that is sensitive to sulfur dioxide pollution. So it's made a remarkable national recovery since the 1990s, and that's been reflected here. But it might also be the milder winters that are helping as well, helping it move north slightly. And then, oh yes, this is, if you want to see an example of it, this is the White Bridge in Otley, if people know that. And this is where it really is quite common now these days. So that was our first one, first bryophyte. And then moving on to another epiphyte, Orthotrachum lyellii. Now, once again, this grows on trees and is susceptible to aerial pollution, principally on ash and sycamore in Wharfedale. But it's very easy to identify once again, well, once you have it in hand, pardon me, because it has all these brown gemmy all over it. So yeah, unlikely to be overlooked. Lees had it in 1888, rare, but locally common. And then, but really the records were Ingleton, Dent and Goredale Scar in Malham. So really places that are quite a long way from the smoky districts. Oh, just a closer look at the gemmy. And I think maybe the large surface area might be something that makes, well, even more susceptible to sulfur dioxide. Now, it used to be in the 20th century, it was considered a Western species, but it became apparent later in the century that it was really just the sulfur dioxide that was keeping it over in the west. And now it's regaining ground quite well. It's a very similar story to Krithia in lots of ways. So this was the distribution in 2013. Now, bearing in mind that the British Bryological Society outing in 2011, I think people would have found it if it was there, but also bearing in mind the lack of trees. And then, yes, it seems to be increasing quite nicely now, especially in Lower Wharfedale, and I think it probably is under-recorded at the moment. And this is its station in Otley. So this tree next to Stephen Smith's garden centre, which the ash tree that you can see there. So a tree that, you know, people will sort of walk past and not really think about at all. It actually harbours this amazing bryophyte just here on one of its branches. So yeah, yes, yeah. So that's another success story in the sense that cleaner air has allowed these bryophytes to make a bit of a comeback in our area. Right, we're now moving over to Ilkley Moor, where an astounding discovery was made in 2012. This is Tillium Casterensis. Now it has its current headquarters in mainland Scotland, not so much in Ireland or the Western Isles, so but in the mainland. And it's a feature of the Caledonian pine forest and Atlantic oak woods. It's rare south of Edinburgh, and it has 1 or 2 stations in Galloway, Snowdonia, that sort of thing. Now, interestingly, Lees in 1888, he has it as very rare, and then he puts a dying out species with the only record from 1840 near Settle, so quite a few years even before he was working as a botanist. And the fact that it says a dying out species suggests to me that it may have been a lot more common, you know, prior to that publication. So this is its current distribution, as I was saying, really, central Scotland, and then quite a few odds and ends in Galloway and in the Lake District there. And then we have a record here, which was our spectacular display. So discovery in 2012, so that's on Ilkley Moor. Yes, we confirmed it in 2016, and then I revisited it in January this year. So it's doing really well. It seems to be thriving. It seems to be spreading as a moss. And you'll notice here that it's not in woodland, but this sort of lots of heather and other ericoid shrubs is the sort of thing that you would find on in the ground floor of a Caledonian pine forest. So there's the odd record turning up in the Peak District in Calderdale, and it's thought likely to be colonizing from spores from the continent, just blowing through on the wind. At the moment, there's no real, we don't know why it was, what was drove it to local extinction from northern England, but sulfur dioxide pollution might be part of it, but also moorland burning is because it's growing in forest here. Moorland burning is likely. Right, so moving on to something completely different, as they say. This is Swagner Magellanicum, one of the many problematic sphagnum that exist. And this is a picture of my first encounter with it on the Isle of Lewis in 2007. However, the first recorded encounter was by a French naturalist, and I just thought this made an interesting little story. And you'll have to forgive my French pronunciation, but in 1766, the French navigator Louis-Antoine de Bougainville was commissioned by the French government to circle the Earth in a 3-year voyage of exploration, and he was accompanied by Philibert Commerson, who was the expedition naturalist, and he in turn was accompanied by his partner and nurse, Jean Barret, and she had to spend the entire 3-year voyage disguised as a man. Just slightly bizarre. Then anyway, in December, they reached the Straits of Magellan, right at the very southern tip of South America, and Commerson went ashore, and he collected this, there was carpets and carpets of red sphagnum, which he collected and brought back to Europe. He obviously wasn't much of a bryologist, as it wasn't really given a name till 20 years later by the Swiss-German bryologist Samuel Elise Briderai. Anyway, and so he described it as Swagner Magellanicum, so a bright red sphagnum. And once it had been described and given a name, it strangely started turning up in Europe, in Norway, and also in England and Scotland. And it's always been described as characteristic of wet bogs on deep, largely undisturbed peat, intermediate between the tops of the hummocks and the water, and a major peat former. So it's a great thing to have on your bogs. However, in the course of my work, I had started to come across it in Galloway and other parts of Scotland, just in forest rides and in disturbed locations. And so I did start to think there was something not, something slightly odd. It wasn't recorded at all by Lees, so if it was present, it was strangely overlooked, given that it's so characteristic. But I just wondered if they might have avoided bogs when they were recording. So this is another picture of it and so since 1798, we've just been recording it as Swagner Magellanicum and Ignorance is Bliss until 2018, so about 250 years after it's first named. The celebrated sphagnologist Christian Hassel started looking into it in Norway. He led a research group. They looked at the DNA and the morphological differences, and it culminated in a paper in the Journal of Bryology, where they decided that it was not one species at all and was in fact 3 species. So this is part of the paper, and you can see the differences between the 3 species based on the morphological characters, stem leaves, branch leaves, parts of the leaf, pardon me, how the cells are and that sort of thing. So we ended up with 3 species where we thought we had one. There was Swagner Magellanicum, which only occurs in Tierra del Fuego in southern Chile. Sphagnum divinum, which is more of a Maya forest type of species on peat substrates. In Norway, it's found along streams and lake shores and wet heath vegetation. And then Sphagnum medium, which is the one that likes to grow on undisturbed ombrotrophic bogs in open treeless habitat. So of my records, I mean, it's not hugely common in Wharfedale. This is its distribution in 2018 when we thought we only had one species. It's essentially had 3 stations for it, Nethergill Farm, on Coniston Moor, and then at Stainburn Forest in the south of our area. So this is Stainburn Forest. This is where it occurs in a clearing in the forest. It is very wet, the bog there. And then, so I had a look at it. This is it from there, from Stainburn Forest. So the branch leaves are at less than 45 degrees. I had a look at the stem leaves and they seem to be quite relatively broad and lingulate. And so I was happy to, I identified it as Sphagnum divinum based on those morphological characters essentially, and then sent a voucher off to the referee, and so it confirms that is the species that we have at Stainburn Forest, which is also the habitat preference you would expect. So this is it at Nethergill Farm. I couldn't find any close-ups actually, but you can see it's a completely different sort of habitat. There's hummocks, hollows, and nice undisturbed bog, and this sort of was the same sort of story really. It turned out to be Sphagnum medium based on the way the branch leaves are, so greater than 45 degrees, and a relatively narrow stem leaf, and a couple of microscopic characters. But once again, I sent it off to the a voucher off. And so we actually have both species, and unfortunately I haven't got to the Coniston one yet, so that's yet to be determined. But it does show the value of accurate recording with good grid references, so that you can actually re-find the species again. Right, very briefly, I'm running out of time, I can see. Finally, I thought we'd take a look at Sphagnum Finbriatum. So this is another sphagnum. It thrives in wet woodland and disturbed bog habitats, and it usually the presence of it usually indicates either disturbance of the substrate and some nutrient enrichment. And it's easily identified. So once again, it has it's a useful sort of indicator species in that sense. This is the stem leaf, and you can see it's what's described as fimbriate, but you can probably see why. Not likely to be overlooked. So in Lees, in 1888, he recorded it in Wharfedale, but it was considered rare. By 2013, this was the sort of distribution we had. So bearing in mind the BBS outing, this is quite thinly distributed. But moving forward to the present day, this is the distribution now. So it's really quite widespread. And I think it's likely to be a genuine increase based on, you'll see that the records tend to be centered on areas of bog, so open habitat and moorland. And I have been doing some work at Malham Tarn National Nature Reserve on tarn moss there, where I go back every 5 years to fixed point quadrats to look at the bryophytes there. So from 2011 to 2017, actually a bit late getting there, it's a 6-year thing, but essentially it increased enormously in the fixed point quadrats between those 2 dates, between 2011 and 2017. And then worryingly in 2021, which was the last survey, not only is the Sphagnum fimbriatum is still there, but there's also quite a lot of algal growth on some of the sphagnum and on the small liverworts there. And it's all pointing towards, and I think in our area as well, just this a huge increase in aerial nitrate pollution. And it's increasing the nutrient load in habitats that are naturally nutrient poor. So it is an indicator, yes, of the increase in nutrients. And where this is coming from, because tarn moss, I sort of said to them, is there runoff going into it? Of course, it's an ombrotrophic bog, so all the water that's in the bog comes from rainfall or precipitation, and so really it it points out something like intensive cattle rearing or intensification of cattle rearing. And in other parts of the UK, and I'm not sure if that would really apply here, to raising chickens outdoors where their nitrate, the nitrate effluent can't be readily controlled. So that was a sort of, yeah. So that was, so that's what the Swagner Finbriatum is telling us. And I think that brings us to the end. Yes, yeah. So here we see that, yes, the impressive powers of colonization displayed by mosses through their light spores, which can travel huge distances before settling and growing, allows them to be used as effective barometers of environmental change in the habitats of Wharfedale. And I just to leave you with the thought of all those thousands and millions of spores that are constantly raining down on us, onto habitats in Wharfedale, and well, and not growing from all over the northern hemisphere. It's just a fascinating thought that if yeah, as conditions change, then they might start to be able to grow. So yes, yeah, I'll leave you with that thought, and thank you and good night.
Thank you, Gordon, and to Nyree and Anne as well. We have overrun a bit, but I think when you see the diversity we've got within the recording area and the level of expertise of the recorders, that's hardly surprising. So we'll just try and maybe get one question to each of you. Otherwise, we'll be pushing people's patience, although I'm sure some will be fascinated. Almost everybody's stayed on still. Nyree, a question about how many species people need to be familiar with here. How many species of butterfly are recorded in Yorkshire or in our area?
Well, in the last 2 years, in the Wharfedale Naturalist recording area, we've got 28 species. That doesn't include silver-washed fritillary or marbled white, which have been seen in the area before. And then we've got Essex skipper, which we've never had a record in our area, but it is in Yorkshire, so it's not a million miles away. And there are a couple of other species that I can think of in Yorkshire that we don't have. There's large heath on some of the old sort of colliery sites down in South Yorkshire, Hatfield Moor and all around there. And brown argus, all ours are northern brown argus, and we're actually quite proud of that. We don't want them mixing with brown argus, Paul in particular, but brown argus are definitely present more, you know, in East York, more across to the east of Yorkshire. So that's another species. So in 28, with around 28 in our area that might be sort of fairly regular. I mean, that includes Dingy Skipper, which we maybe get 1 or 2 records a year, and some years none at all. So yeah, you're round about, yeah, sort of fairly common ones around about probably 27 for our area and a few more for Yorkshire.
So there you go, Ian Manfield, there's the answer. And at least with butterflies, as with ladybirds, they seem to be quite descriptive names. When you're into bryophytes, you're definitely on your own with some of those names. On to Anne, please. Straightforward question. Do harlequin ladybirds eat aphids?
Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, they're very good at eating aphids. That's why they were introduced in the first place to the United States and into Europe as an aphid predator. But they don't only eat aphids, they eat other ladybirds' eggs and other ladybird larvae and butterfly similarly, but they are indeed voracious predators of aphids.
Thank you. And Gordon, you mentioned at the end there about increasing nutrient load, which may be at the moment increasing bryophyte presence. Is there a danger if that continues that they get out competed by other plants also benefiting from those extra nutrients?
Yes, yeah, yes, essentially something like purple moorgrass could does respond well to nutrient inputs, and so yeah, it could start to outcompete. And of course, where one bryophyte grows, it means that another bryophyte isn't growing. So but yeah, I think the algae, the start of the algae thing on tarn moss was the main, I mean that's actually out competing the bryophytes, and so it's yeah, it is quite a worry, but I suppose yeah, It's just change really, isn't it? If we've got without the sulfur dioxide pollution, we get an increase in species. And I know that lichens respond well to nitrate, aerial nitrate pollution. And so that the highest diversities through moorland are along the roads where you've got the nitrates from exhaust.
Interesting, interesting. Well, thanks again, all three of you. As I say, time is marching on, so I'm going to pass back to Helen and ask her to sum up for us, please.
Thanks very much, Jeff. So it just remains for me to thank all the three presenters who've presented tonight for all their hard work in putting together the presentations, but also, of course, all their hard work over the year, keeping the records and doing such a great service for the Society. And I'd like actually to take the opportunity to thank not just the recorders who have spoken tonight, but all our recorders who all do an absolutely fantastic and essential job for the Society. And I hope, and certainly in my case this is true, I hope it will have encouraged those of you who've listened to be a little bit more assiduous in collecting and sending in your own records, because obviously these records are no good unless they are sent in. They're no good, you know, wasting away on your windowsill or whatever. You've got to actually get it together and send them to the recorders. So it would be great if people were inspired tonight to try to do a little bit more of that. Just one or two more things to say before I close the meeting. One is that there will be a birding walk this coming Saturday. So if people are feeling like getting a nice breath of fresh air, Andrew Kelly, our bird recorder, is going to be leading a walk to Grimwith Reservoir. And you never know what you're going to see there. So I hope that some of you will be able to make that. And the other thing I just wanted to announce was our AGM, which is going to be on the 22nd of March. Thank you, Jeff. And I think that's going to be followed. It's covered up for me by the chat, but I'm pretty sure the slide says that it's going to be followed by the bird report, which is coming from Andrew Kelly, the same Andrew who is leading the walk to Grimwith. So I hope that many of you will be able to make both the walk and also the AGM.
Thanks,
Thank
Helen.
you
And
very much.
Emphasize, it'd be great if people could join the AGM, because we do need a quorum, and I think our membership has grown enough now. We need more than 50, so do please join us if you can. Bear with us for the AGM, and Andrew's report I'm sure will be very good.
Yes, you've got a treat lined up. Having sat through the business, we're going to be treated to Andrew's bird report. So that's a good incentive to appear and help us with the quorum. Okay, well, thank you again to our recorders. Thank you everybody for coming to the talk tonight. And I may see you on the birding walk perhaps on Saturday, and if not, at the AGM. Thank you. Bye-bye.